All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to tackle some really interesting JFK stuff.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're talking conspiracy theories, man. Specifically, the idea that there might have been two Oswalds.
To Oswald. Wow.
Yeah, like a doppelganger situation.
That's a new one for
I
me.
know, right?
Yeah.
We'll be using articles from the fourth decade. It's this journal totally dedicated to JFK assassination research. This issue we're looking at is from 1998.
Okay, so kind of a blast from the past then. What kind of stuff are we diving into?
Well, the first article is called Coup d'etat, a response
Hmm.
by Christopher Sherritt. And he basically lays out this whole argument that the assassination was a planned coup. Like not just a lone nut gunman, but a whole orchestrated
And
thing.
a coup. Wow, that's a bold claim.
Right. But he backs it up. He talks about how Kennedy was clashing with the CIA, especially after the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. Kennedy was pretty furious with the CIA, even talked about breaking it up.
Exactly. And Sherritt argues that this made some powerful enemies for Kennedy within the government, people who might have seen him as a threat.
Yeah, it's not hard to imagine that, especially back in those Cold War days. The CIA had a lot of power.
Tons of power. And actually, there's this quote from a New York Times article that Sherritt brings up. It's a source talking about how the CIA was total power and unaccountability.
Total power and unaccountability. That's pretty chilling.
I know, right? It makes you think about what they were capable of if they really wanted Kennedy out of the picture.
For sure. So what else does Sherritt talk about?
Well, he gets into how the media played a role, maybe unintentionally, in covering up what really happened. He says they initially reported on stuff that hinted at a conspiracy, but then that information kind of got suppressed and the lone gunman story took over.
It's almost like they were trying to control the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Steer everyone towards one specific explanation.
Exactly. And then Sherritt gets into all the weird stuff about Oswald himself, his connections to intelligence agencies, the evidence against him, even the fact that some key forensic records were just destroyed.
Destroyed. Why would they do that?
It's super suspicious, right?
Hmm.
Makes you wonder what they were trying to hide. If they were so sure Oswald acted alone, you'd think they'd want to keep all the evidence.
Totally. So is that it for Sherritt's article?
Pretty much. He
Yep.
basically lays the groundwork for questioning the official story and hinting at something much bigger going on behind the scenes.
Makes sense. So where do we go from there?
Well, the next article, Johnson and Hoover Talked by Carlton Sterling, takes things to a whole other level. It's all about these conversations that President Johnson and FBI Director Hoover had just days after the assassination. They were recorded on White House tapes.
Wow, so we're getting into some real insider stuff now.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, both Johnson and Hoover referred to the shooter as they. Not he, but they.
Hey, like multiple shooters.
Exactly. And we know that Johnson was obsessed with the idea of a frontal shot, one coming from the grassy knoll, not where Oswald supposedly was.
So right from the start, Johnson was already questioning the official narrative.
It seems that way. He kept pushing Hoover about the direction of the shots that hit Governor Connally. Like, he wanted to know if Connally was hit while standing between Kennedy and the line of fire.
So both the president and the FBI director were having private conversations that didn't exactly line up with the official story.
It's pretty wild, right? And there's more. Sterling reveals that Hoover confirmed Oswald was actually in New Orleans when this CIA story came out, placing him in Mexico City, getting money from the Cubans to kill Kennedy.
Hold on, so they were putting out false information about Oswald?
Seems like it. Later on, the CIA even admits to Johnson that the whole Mexico City story was made up.
That's insane. They were spreading fake news to make Oswald look guilty.
Yep, and it gets even crazier. Sterling brings up an account from Tip O'Neill, the congressman who later became Speaker of the House.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Well, O'Neill said that two of JFK's aides, Kenneth O'Donnell and David Powers, they were in the motorcade and actually believed the shots came from the grassy knoll. But they changed their stories to avoid any trouble.
Wow, so they saw something that contradicted the official story, but they felt pressured to keep quiet.
It's a pretty heavy situation to be in, for sure. So Sterling basically concludes that Johnson and Hoover knew the official story wasn't the whole truth. They knew about the discrepancies, the fake news, but they chose to control the narrative instead of actually finding out what happened.
Wow, so we have evidence that points to possible motives, a cover-up, and even high-ranking officials who might have known more than they let on.
It's a lot to take in, I know.
Yeah.
But believe me, it gets even wilder from here. Okay, so we've got this potential motive from the CIA and a possible cover-up, but then it gets even weirder, right?
Right, this next article, Webster and Mcultra. The Smoking Gun by Gary Hill. This is where it gets really strange. He brings in this guy, Robert E. Webster, and he says Webster is like Oswald's doppelganger. Like, they look alike, similar backgrounds, the whole deal.
A doppelganger. Okay, come on. That has got to be more than a coincidence.
Yeah, Hill doesn't think it's a coincidence at all. He thinks both Oswald and Webster were part of this false defector program where they trained people to pretend to defect to the Soviet Union, basically become double agents. And get this, he also thinks they were both involved with Mcultra.
Wait, Mcultra, like the CIA mind control program.
Exactly. That's the one. Brainwashing, truth serums, the whole shebang. Hill even suggests that Webster's mental and physical problems now, they could be because of this psychic driving maintenance thing.
Psychic driving maintenance? What's
Well,
that?
it was supposedly a technique they used in Mcultra to reinforce program behaviors. But if they stopped the maintenance, it could cause serious mental breakdowns.
So basically, Webster could have been brainwashed and then just tossed aside when they were done with him.
That's what Hill's suggesting, yeah. Pretty disturbing stuff. And he says both Oswald and Webster fit the profile of an Mcultra subject. They had similar backgrounds, personality types, even some potential links directly to the program. It's like they were molded from the same mold.
Yeah, like they were creating these Manchurian candidates or something.
Yeah.
And you're saying that Hill thinks Webster could have been the patsy instead of Oswald if things had gone down differently.
Yeah, he even says that straight out. If the assassination happened in Pittsburgh, where Webster lived, maybe it would have been him that got framed. It's almost like they had these guys set up to play a specific role, and it didn't matter who it ended up being.
Wow, that's a creepy thought.
Oh.
So we've got this potential double agent program and this whole Mcultra mind control thing, and they're potentially creating these guys that are almost interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
But it still doesn't explain the TWO Oswald's thing, right? How did they pull that off?
Okay, well, that's where John Armstrong comes in. His article is called Lee and Harvey Oswald, The Mystery of the Wallets. And he takes this whole idea of the double agent program and Mcultra and adds in this really intriguing twist. He says there were actually two 2-0 men, both named Lee Harvey Oswald, that they used to create confusion.
Two Oswalds with the same name. Now, hold on. How does that work?
Right. It sounds crazy, but Armstrong presents a lot of evidence. He talks about all these witnesses who saw Oswald in different places at the same time, which messes up the official timeline.
So, they intentionally created a situation where you couldn't track Oswald's movement.
That's the idea. They wanted to make it super confusing. And then he brings in this whole thing about the wallets. Apparently, they found multiple wallets with IDs for Lee Harvey Oswald and his alias Alec Adele at different locations.
Wait, multiple wallets with the same ID? Why would there even be more than one?
That's a good question, right? Armstrong goes through this whole chain of custody thing for these wallets, and he finds all these inconsistencies and missing information. He even says a wallet with Oswald's ID was found at the scene of Officer Tippett's murder, but it was never even logged or photographed by the police. What?
That's super shady. Sounds like someone didn't want a record of that wallet existing.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. And then there's this whole thing with the fingerprints. They supposedly lifted prints from Tippett's car, but the records of those prints, they just vanished.
Vanished? What does that even mean?
They were just gone. Poof. And then later, they just have this officer testify that the prints were smudges and they couldn't use them. But get this, a researcher named Dale Myers, he got hold of some crime lab photos of the fingerprints, and they didn't even match Oswald's.
Oh, wow. So they might have straight up switched out the evidence.
Could be. And Armstrong brings up a bunch of other missing stuff, too. Theater patron lists from the Texas theater where they arrested Oswald, gone. A sighting of an Oswald lookalike driving a car that belonged to a friend of Officer Tippett while Oswald was already in custody, unexplained.
Yeah.
Oswald's driver's license file from the Texas Department of Public Safety, poof, gone.
So we've got these disappearing documents, conflicting witnesses, and multiple wallets with the same ID. It's like they were going out of their way to make things confusing.
Exactly. And Armstrong thinks it was all part of this big Oswald project.
Okay, so what is this Oswald project exactly?
It's a bit complicated, but basically Armstrong thinks it was this operation to plant a Russian-speaking spy in the Soviet Union, maybe even as far back as the late 50s. And he thinks they used Oswald's double for this, started building this fake identity for him years in advance.
So they were grooming this guy to be a defector.
Yeah, something like that. They were feeding him info about Oswald, made sure he spoke Russian, even planted evidence that he was into communism. Meanwhile, the real Oswald, he might have been working with the CIA here in the US, posing as his own doubly double.
Hold on. Posing as his own double.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like, imagine that. And Armstrong even found this memo from J. Edgar Hoover, where Hoover is worried about someone impersonating Oswald.
So even Hoover was suspicious of something fishy going on with Oswald's identity.
Yep, even HE was picking up on it. And Armstrong thinks they eventually brought the double back to the U.S., but the double had no idea what was really going on. He was just being set up to take the fall for the assassination.
So they were using him as a patsy the whole time.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And Armstrong even thinks that the Oswald who Jack Ruby shot, that wasn't even the double. He thinks it was the real Oswald. Like, they killed him to tie up loose ends.
Wait, so the Oswald we saw get shot on TV, that was the real one, the one working with the CIA.
That's what Armstrong says. So they used both these guys, manipulated them, and then silenced the one who knew too much. And the other guy, the double, he's left holding the bag, branded as the lone assassin.
This is just insane. It's like a conspiracy theory inside another conspiracy theory.
Right, and Armstrong says that was the whole point. They wanted to create so much confusion that nobody could ever figure out the truth. It was the perfect cover-up.
But WHY? Why go to all this trouble?
Plausible deniability. They wanted to create the situation where there were so many possible explanations, so many potential suspects, that nobody could point the finger for sure. If one Oswald was tied to the Soviets and the other to the CIA, it just creates this giant mess that's impossible to untangle.
So basically, the Oswald Project was a smokescreen to protect whoever was really behind the assassination.
That's what Armstrong argues, yeah. They used Oswald and his double as pawns in this giant messed up game. And in the end, both those guys got screwed over.
Man, that's a heavy thought. Like, imagine having your whole life be a lie just to be used as a patsy in a presidential assassination.
It's pretty chilling, right? And it just makes you wonder who was really pulling the strings, who benefited from Kennedy's death, and how deep does this whole thing go?
Man, it's hard to even process all that. Like, two Oswalds, mind control, all this disappearing evidence. It's like we're living in a spy movie or something.
It really does feel like that sometimes, doesn't it? I mean, the JFK assassination is this real-life event that's just packed with mystery. It's like even crazier than anything you'd see in a movie.
And, you know, it's not just a story, right? It was real people, real lives that were affected by this.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if we can even ever know the truth about what happened.
That's a good question. I mean, with so much effort put into covering things up, it makes you wonder how much we can actually uncover. Like, the more we dig, the more questions we seem to find.
It's true, you know? It's like every answer just leads to another question, another layer of this whole messed up situation. But that's kind of what makes these deep dives so interesting, right? We're trying to peel back those layers, look at the evidence, and see if we can make sense of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's a reminder that history isn't always so clear-cut. It's not just what we read in textbooks. It's messy, it's complicated, and sometimes the full story, it might just stay hidden.
Yeah. And with something as big as this, the assassination of a president, and the idea that powerful groups might be involved, it's no wonder people are still searching for answers all these years later. It's like it's a wound that hasn't healed, you know?
I think you're right. It's like this search for the truth. It's part of trying to make sense of it all, trying to find some kind of resolution. But it's tough, right? I mean, where do we even begin when there's so much conflicting information, so many theories, and the chance that evidence has been messed with or even destroyed?
It can feel overwhelming for sure. Like, how do you even know what to believe anymore?
I think the first thing is to just accept that uncertainty, you know? We might never have all the pieces of the puzzle. The truth, it might be more complicated, more ambiguous than we want it to be.
Yeah, it's not always black and white, right? So I guess it's about being willing to question things, to look at the evidence, and to come to our own conclusions based on what we find. But we got to be careful, too.
Exactly. We got to be aware of our own biases, you know? We all come to any historical event with our own ideas and beliefs. We need to be honest about those, see how they might affect how we interpret things, and try to be as objective as we can.
So it's not just about finding the truth, but also about understanding the whole picture, right? All the different perspectives, the motivations, the context of everything that was happening back then.
Exactly. And remember, history's not static. New evidence comes up, people offer new interpretations, and our understanding of the past changes. This is probably going to be debated and looked at again and again for years to come.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners then? After this deep dive into the JFK assassination, what should they keep in mind?
Stay curious. Keep asking questions. keep looking for answers. Don't settle for easy explanations, especially with something as complex as this. The JFK assassination is a perfect example of how the search for truth is a process, and sometimes the answers you find aren't what you expected.
It's also a reminder that we can and should question official narratives, Look at things from different angles, keep an open mind, because sometimes the truth is way more bizarre than anything we could make up. So to our listeners, here's something to think about. What if this whole Oswald project was even more complicated than we thought? What if there are layers we haven't even begun to uncover? Keep digging, keep questioning, and don't ever stop searching for the truth, even if it takes you down some strange paths.
Because at the end of the day, the truth is worth it.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. We explore, we question, and we hope you do the same. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the JFK assassination. And until next time, keep exploring the world with an open mind and a curious heart.